Hi, friend. Today, I'm lifting back up a conversation I had not too long ago with the brilliant and thought-provoking Edgar Villanueva. Edgar literally wrote the book on decolonizing philanthropy, and he's on a mission to advance a more just and equitable world. In our conversation, we cover a lot of ground, but we really focus in on a couple key areas. First, a lot of companies want a quick diversity, equity, and inclusion checklist to run through. But as Edgar details, the real work takes years and requires intentional changes and reallocating of resources. In our conversation, Edgar gets specific about some ways that you can think about reallocating resources in your own work and life in service of justice. He also says we need to create spaces where different cultures can thrive. As Edgar says in this conversation, and it's worth hearing these words for yourself, in all work, challenge yourself and your company to speak truth to power with love. Gosh, don't you just love that? Speak truth to power with love. This is one of my favorite episodes, and I'm glad to serve it back up to you today. Enjoy the show, and I'll see you on the other side. And if you like what you hear, I do hope you'll give the show a rating or a review. Now, on to my conversation with Edgar. Welcome to Mission Forward, a podcast exploring how big ideas and social change take hold. My name is Carrie Fox, and I'm your host. Listen in as we talk with innovative thinkers, makers, and doers in social change, and we explore how foundations, philanthropists, and corporate and community leaders are challenging business as usual in order to move missions forward in meaningful and memorable ways. Today, we are talking with Edgar Villanueva, author, activist, senior VP of the Schott Foundation, and a member of the Lumbee tribe. Here at the Mission Forward podcast, we look at how transformative social change takes hold. So I have, for many years, but really in this podcast now only been in the last couple months, listening and learning from folks like you who have found ways to break through and disrupt business as usual in ways that lead to more equitable and just outcomes. And I have been watching your work for the last couple of years, and so I am especially grateful to have you talking with me today about decolonizing wealth and how you have disrupted a sector pretty significantly in the last couple of years.
Thank you for having me on. I'm really excited about the conversation today.
Edgar, I'm going to start at the top. Before I get into the book and the movement, I love that you won the 2018 Most Radical Philanthropy Critic, so congratulations on that. But I want you to take me back a few more steps to your roots in southeastern North Carolina, and tell me about the path that has led you to lead this decolonizing wealth movement.
Absolutely. So yes, I am originally from North Carolina. That's where my people are. And as you said, a member of the Lumbee tribe. We are the largest tribe on the East Coast. A lot of folks are surprised to learn that there are Native Americans in the U.S. South, but we are there. And that's the community that I come from. So I think, obviously, my cultural identity and being Indigenous has really shaped who I am as a person. Being from the South also, and from the family that I'm from that was very engaged in the church, the Christian church. There's a lot of impressions that I've taken away from that as well in my identity. And frankly, growing up, I didn't know the difference between like values or beliefs that I was holding as a young person. I didn't know if it was because I was Native or from the South. This is just who I was, right? And the family that I was in. But later in life, when I got to college, that's where I really got more connected to the Native community because my family had moved away from Robeson County when I was very young. And so I was the only Native American in my K-12 experience. And so when I got to the University of North Carolina, and I was just so hungry to connect with people, other Native students. And I began to understand that there were certain things about my worldview and my perspective that were unique to being Native American, honestly. And from being from the Lumbee tribe, I mean, all tribes are not the same, obviously, right? We have 574 tribes and federally recognized tribes in the United States. So, but I began to really just want to connect more deeply with that identity because when you are Native American in this country, you are just, automatically born into an identity crisis situation. And I wanted to more understand the origins of my people and to understand what made us special. And frankly, I had so assimilated to white culture, like dominant white culture is all around us. It's an easy thing to do. And felt quite lost in some ways. So that's been my work and my path since college, is to do the work of decolonization, which simply means for me unlearning a lot of things and relearning the traditional values of my people. And the work that I'm doing to decolonize wealth, I stumbled into the philanthropic sector like any person that you meet that works at a foundation pretty much. 15 years ago, or almost 16 now, when I started, there wasn't a very clear pathway into a career in philanthropy. But I had studied public health and had been working in the nonprofit sector on issues of health equity. And I got recruited to a foundation. And I thought, what a fantastic opportunity to be a part of this sector and this institution that is moving millions of dollars to nonprofit organizations. And the warmness and the romanticized ideas that may come to mind when I say that I had access to millions of dollars and I was moving millions of dollars. Some of that is true. But what I found was just a clash with my identity and as I was becoming politicized around issues of race and power as a young person. There was actually a major clash with the culture and the dominant norms within the place and institution of philanthropy that caused a lot of problems for me, just a lot of pain, a lot of heartache, and some disillusionment around the realities of the world, right? And the philanthropy is inherently connected to capitalism and all of these things that I had to grapple with. So the work that I do now, the book that I wrote in Decolonizing Wealth Project, is actually creating space for those contradictions and to have conversations and to name the truth of what is what, and to think of ways to move forward and differently with a vision for a world in which we can all thrive in our cultures.
How long were you in the philanthropy sector when you realized something's not right here?
Probably a couple years, because honestly, the first 2 years were really blissful. I had a really nice paycheck. As someone coming out of graduate school with debt, I enjoyed, the proximity to power as well. I remember my first Christmas when I worked at the foundation. I actually received a Christmas card in the mail from the governor of North Carolina, like a real Christmas card. It was like actually signed. I was like, wow, who am I? And what is this place that I'm working in that I'm now at in the VIP section. So part of that, actually felt good to have power and to go into communities and have the key to the treasure box. This is something I wasn't used to having. And but I remember, really clearly some things that began to happen that made me realize that everything was not as it seemed. I remember beginning to ask very, really innocent questions where I was really trying to understand and make sense of things. And the fact that I was even asking questions was unwelcome. It was as if I were questioning authority and, was told to kind of know my place, and that my job was to not ask questions, but to take my money and to distribute that money in a way that aligned with the status quo that was in place. And it was above my pay grade to question any of that. And so that's where I began to really understand that there was something larger going on behind the scenes in this world of wealth and money and power that, of course, created this curiosity in me. Because if you're saying no and things are hush hush and there are conversations I can't be a part of, then of course I wanted to know more. But one quick story I'll share is that I'll never forget a board meeting where I was presenting a docket of grants, and we had made some intentions at the foundation to fund different groups, to expand our networks, to move more money into communities of color. At that time, like most of our grantees were large institutional kind of organizations like healthcare systems and universities. And I remember presenting a particular grant that I felt very passionate about funding. I mean, this was good work. It was in a community that we really needed to fund and had not funded. And I was just getting a no all the way around. And I wasn't, I respected the position of the board and the president there. So I wasn't being like absolutely like anarchy or anything, but I was really asking in a loving way for more explanation about the no, so that I would have a clear discernment moving forward around what's in and what's out, right? And in the middle of that question, my president said in front of the entire board and staff that, Edgar, you're getting too big for your britches. And it was like this like shutdown. Like I just felt like my heart just sank into my stomach, because I realized right then and there kind of like the situation of what things, how things were, that I was not an organization that was going to celebrate me being a leader or celebrate questioning or trying to be innovative to do something different. And then, so that was really the first marker that being status quo, being coloring within the lines is the thing that's rewarded and celebrated, and not anything else within the sector.
You know what I find so fascinating, though, about what you did is there are a lot of people who would have been in that room and heard that and walked away and said, you know what, this isn't for me. I'm going to go find something else. Instead, you did something very different, right? So you dug even further and you said, I'm going to do something, even if I'm a little bit scared about it, right? I've heard you talk a little bit about there were high stakes, right? With you writing a book and basically, even from inside the philanthropic sector, calling out the philanthropic sector for some things that it was doing wrong. And so I just want to acknowledge that is not something that a lot of people think they have the courage to do, right? But you did, and I appreciate that. What was interesting about it is you did more than strike a chord, right? You struck a nerve, but in a positive way, right? That at least from the outside in, and I'd love to get your take on this, but it feels like it has really moved philanthropies to challenge the way they do business. And I would love to hear from you what you think it was, whether it was something about the message or the messenger, right? How you delivered it, but there was something that made people hear what you were saying. That I think a lot of people don't have that skill to have that kind of message stick.
Yeah, I had chills even as you're asking the question, because I think 2 years later, actually this month, 2 years ago is when the book first came out. I remember just the knots in my stomach around what the reaction would be, which will be the case for anyone putting out a book. You're like, you kind of hold your breath and you hope that people, will appreciate your work. But I did feel like the stakes were high, and I was sharing stories and putting stuff in the book that was sort of taboo for within philanthropy to talk about, right? Like naming names and and saying certain things, talking about internalized oppression and stuff like that. So, I think for me, what I imagine to be sort of some of the reason that this framework and this conversation has really influenced philanthropy. One, just me as a person, I will say it, and it's not about me. There is a movement of people within philanthropy that have been pushing for a long, long time. And I do remember back early on, after that situation where I was told I was too big for my britches, I went down to a neighboring foundation to speak with an elder there and kind of shared that story. And Gladys Washington, a name that a lot of people will know, who had been, she just retired recently, but had been in philanthropy a long time, pushing. She said to me, baby, these institutions, these foundations are doing exactly what they were set up to do, and you ain't going to change it. And so I do remember, I always carried those words with me in that challenge, but I think that what was really in place is that because of all the seeds that have been planted, and I have been someone who had been in philanthropy for a number of years, I think I was seen as a rising leader or, rising star potentially in philanthropy, someone that was speaking on panels and those kinds of things early in my career, I had some level of respect and credibility in the field that people could appreciate. I wasn't coming out of left field as like a disgruntled employee kind of person, right? Also, I think that there's a fatigue that people have been experiencing in philanthropy around all of the decades of talking and researching and analyzing data around diversity and culture within our sector, but not seeing a change and needing and wanting something more. There's been a conversation like decolonizing wealth happening at the water coolers for a long time, and in the back hallways of conferences, but never on the main stage. So when I came out into the light with this message, it just resonated with so many people who have been having these conversations, but afraid to have them publicly, or have been grappling with the issues and didn't have the language or the context for the issues. And it was sort of like, a now or never moment. Like, if we're really going to deliver on our mission, if we're really about equity, if we're about that life, then we've got to do something radically different. It cannot be more of the same. And I just felt like it was like this collective sigh of relief. Like, finally someone said what we've all been thinking. And the other thing that I'll just say about it is, I think the approach of my work is one that speaks the truth, and it speaks the truth of power, but also does that in love and does that in patience and understanding. And maybe that's part of my Southern upbringing, but it's the claims that I make in the book, the facts that I state about philanthropy and how we've not been effective, how we've not been just, are facts. And you can't argue the facts, and you can't argue with someone's personal experience working in this field. And so I think that storytelling and that vulnerability that I expressed in this work has been something that folks have welcomed in and want to hear more of, want to respond to in some way. Because ultimately, I do believe that the vast majority of people who work in philanthropy, who work in the social finance sector, are well-meaning people and intend to do good. Often they are just blinded by privilege and systemic barriers that get in the way of being crystal clear about a better way to do the work.
That's interesting. I mean, it maybe gets back to what you were saying earlier, too, that this kind of call to arms that you brought to the sector, it wasn't an outside critique of the sector saying, that looks broken over there, you should do something about it. It's, I'm in this too, and we together should do something about it. So I want to hear what you thought the potential outcome of the book would be, or the response to the book would be. And now, 2 years after it's been released, what you point to as some of the interesting measures of success of how the message has been received.
Yeah. So, I thought at best, when the book came out, that I would, sell a couple copies and maybe do like a small book tour and maybe like 5 bookstores around the country or something like that. So I also did fear some type of retaliation. Honestly, I lawyered up. I was ready and expecting the potential worse. Although obviously there's nothing in the book that I feel is tearing down, other folks or institutions in that way. But we are such a powerful sector that even loving critique actually kind of, scared me. I look really brave and bold now, but at the time I wasn't sure. And there were certain parts of the book that I grappled with actually, whether or not I should take them out, like weeks before it went to publication. So, I didn't expect much, and I thought, I'm going to do this and then I'll get back to my job and life will move on. But what has happened is that honestly, the book changed my life. And since the book came out, I have my own analysis around decolonization and healing, and all of this has evolved even so much more because I'm always talking about it and always thinking about it. And, I'm on a journey. Like, I'm not a person to be set on a pedestal that has fully arrived and figured all of this out. But I am on a healing journey, and and I think this work is always evolving. The tour has never ended. I still feel like I'm on a book tour. I'm still doing events, and even during this time of pandemic where things are online, I'm still having conversations and around the book. And the book has won awards and has been a bestseller. And it's incredible. Within philanthropy, I've been amazed at how large foundations, I could like name names of different institutions that people would recognize, but the book has been used to guide foundations through their strategic planning processes. I feel like every person in philanthropy has probably read it by now. It's like everyone I talk to has it, every board has read it. Also, beyond just like reading and grappling with the material, which I know folks are doing internally, there have been grant making initiatives launched. People have started funding Native communities that have not funded them before. But what's even more exciting to me is that some of the more radical ideas that I put out, such as foundations should take 10% of their endowments to just hand them over to communities of color. There are foundations who are actually considering doing that. There's a foundation in Canada that the board has actually committed to taking a percentage of their endowment and handing it over to First Nations people. Here in the U.S., I'm currently talking with a very large foundation who is in the process of thinking through. The board has approved this at some level, but it's seriously looking at how to take a portion, 10%, actually, just because I made that number up of their endowment and giving that back to individuals as a form of reparations. And so reparations and that terminology and that framework in philanthropy is a very real thing and a real conversation that people are having. And so I wish I had the capacity to do a full-scale evaluation, because I truly, truly believe that philanthropic practice has shifted, and that it's shifted permanently, that there's no going back to the way things were. I think that talking about race and power is so much more the norm in this moment. And obviously, because of the movement for Black Lives and what we're experiencing now, that has just like accelerated things even more further. And I know that people have foundations have divested and increased spending rates. A large foundation in Seattle decided to spend down after reading the book and just liquidate their assets completely and hand them over to communities. So I am overwhelmed at the response. And beyond those large responses, I have to say there's countless of just individual stories that I could share of people who have reached out or emailed. And it's everything from impacts from this book saved my marriage. I met my fiance at your book event and we're getting married, to this book saved my life. Because the reality is that within institutions and philanthropy and other places, for so many folks, there's a lot of trauma that people of color especially hold sometimes, that can become so intense and severe that you physically can become sick. And I'll never forget a woman who told me that she had become so physically sick and was approaching death, and after reading the book made a decision to get out of that situation. And so that, so many impacts. And I know we're going to talk outside of philanthropy. There's been additional impacts across sectors that are super inspiring.
It seems like you were just scratching the surface of a conversation that is starting and has been long overdue in corporate America, right? We know that corporations are wrestling with their own storied past as we think about capitalism and all the flaws of it. And businesses are thinking about what they can do, what they must do to address systemic racism and their role in perpetuating it. And I'm curious if the book has started to make its way to whether it's corporate foundations or corporate boardrooms, right? It certainly seems like a lot of what you say could be really applicable to a lot of corporations right now.
Early last year, when the book was really taking off, I did begin to get calls from financial institutions, corporations that I was kind of surprised to hear from, right? And some of these are very public corporations that are demonized in the media and are very problematic in a lot of ways. I had an event actually in North Carolina at the Bank of America headquarters, and who hosted They hosted the event in their building, but it was put together by community folks. And I remember going to this event, and a friend of mine back in North Carolina saying that they would not come, they would not set foot in this building, who has done so many, has wronged the community in so many ways, and was kind of upset with me for actually going and participating, which I can totally understand. And I had to make a decision in that moment around, what am I trying to accomplish with this work? If I'm really trying to disrupt and create or shift or influence a conversation in the hallways of power, I have to be willing to go into the belly of the beast, right? And of course, I have to discern the intentions that folks may have. But if there's an opportunity to sit down at the table and have a real conversation about truth and reconciliation and what folks and organizations need to do to repair relationships, I can't not do that.
I'm afraid to ask this. How many times does it feel like it's a real conversation versus someone who's not really ready to have a real conversation?
I would say more times than not, it feels really authentic, because what I quickly do in these situations is get right to the humanity, right? I get beyond where we're sitting, who's in the room, what title you hold, where you work. It's like I really don't care about that. What I care about is the human being that I'm engaging with right now. And I'm getting quickly to a point of helping people understand that our humanity and our connectedness around that. Because if we can't understand that at a basic level, then I just feel like there's no hope in influencing. The system is people, and people are the system. And I think sometimes we get just kind of confused by that. So I felt really authentic. I feel like in so many places that I've been, I mean, people are like, there are tears, and we create healing spaces wherever we are. And one thing that I've really learned, I've had my biases. I've been a nonprofit guy my entire career. So I've had my biases about corporate America and the for-profit sector. But I have to say that what I've learned in the past 2 years is that there are good people who are on the right side of history working within all of these systems and places, right? And how can I be self-righteous as someone who has worked inside philanthropy, which is, the money comes from corporate America. So it's like we're really, in a sense, some people might say, laundering money for corporate America. And so I know that there's a lot of change that needs and must happen within the corporate sector. And there are really honest-hearted people who are inside those systems and those organizations trying to change things. I'll share another quick story. When I went to Amazon headquarters last year, and they were having an internal conference around race. And this was right after the whole debacle with HQ2 and Queens, New York, and all of that. And again, I grappled with, should I go? What is this? What's going on here? And on the call with the people who are planning that conference, I asked, is any issue off the table? Do I have to tiptoe around? And they were like, absolutely not. And I have to say, Amazon is a company who has so many problems, right? And Jeff Bezos as a person, again, is so many problematic things we could talk about. But what I will say is, in that moment, there were 4,000 or 6,000 people at a conference that was completely optional to attend. And we were talking about race. And I went into the belly of that beast. And it was actually one of the most powerful conferences on race I had ever seen. I was moved to tears multiple times, and I left there feeling a little bit confused myself, because I'm like, wow, that was actually probably better than any conference on race in the nonprofit sector that I've been to. And why and how is Amazon the group that's producing this? But what I really respect about what happened in that day is that I didn't have to get up and point a finger at Amazon and say, you've done all this, you screwed the community over in this way, and this way, and this way. They started that meeting with a slide and a conversation about all the things that have been going wrong and how community had been harmed by that corporation, and acknowledged that and took ownership over it and said, we must do better. And that's why we're here today. How many times have we seen a foundation do that? To say, let me come out and tell y'all all the things we've done wrong. They talked about all the things that are in the news, all the criticisms of Amazon that we could get into. They named it themselves and took ownership of it, right? And so that actually created a vulnerability and a conversation to talk about, well, what are the things that we must do different? The other thing that I appreciate about some of the corporations that I've worked with is the level of accountability that I see in some tech companies at Amazon. Amazon actually said, okay, so last year when we had this meeting, this was the second annual meeting, we saw that we fell short around DEI in these areas, and this is what we're going to change about it. One of them was a lack of diversity in partnerships with Amazon Studios. And they said, we were here and our goal is to be there. And then the next year they reported out in this conference, this is where we are and the progress that we've made. And, I took from that an appreciation, because I have to say in philanthropy, I've gone to conferences for 15 years talking about this stuff. And I feel like we're still at square one. And we're not looking at data and we're not tracking progress. And there's absolutely no accountability to achieving a certain level of progress. So there are things that we can definitely take away from, our partners who are working in the private sector.
Yeah, and that's true. We do some work in higher ed and feel that way often too, that it just seems to take so much longer than it should to really move something forward, right? But we are certainly in a moment now. We're a B corporation, and we are proud to be among a set of organizations who are really challenging a business model and have been for many years. But you're right. I think there's a level of transparency that business leaders are willing to take right now, and ownership of past work that has been misplaced or unintentionally or intentionally so, right? Mistakes that have been made over time that they are owning, including my company, owning to think about what the future could look like differently. So I do think there's a big opportunity there. I do want to ask you, though, it does seem like people throw DEI or Jedi, right? Whatever their phrase is, they throw it around like it's a trendy term. And I'm curious what you're seeing as you're thinking about this company or this time, that certainly there's a lot of movement and action. And that's a good thing, right? To your point, we're not going to turn anyone away if they are showing up ready to do work. But making sure that people really are ready and willing to dig in and do the work and see what has been in front of them the entire time that many times people haven't been willing to see.
I think in many ways we've done a disservice by lumping the D, E, and I together, because they absolutely mean very different things. And it's very easy to put out statements around Black Lives Matter and to think about diversity, which is very, very important. But diversity should be the floor and not the aspiration, in my point of view. I think what's really important with DEI is for folks who understand the difference. And for me, the ultimate goal is equity, and equity is about ownership. It's about power. It's getting beyond a change in representation, or even like thinking about cultures that are inclusive, right? But also like how are we shifting power in a way that is actually privileging people who have been marginalized. And that is the true tough work for organizations to take on, and for even in our individual lives to think about how we can be more equitable. If you have been in power and if you've had privilege and resources, when you really get to the point where you're operationalizing equity in your life or in your company, it may actually feel like oppression for you, because you're literally giving up power and taking a step back. And so that is where I think a lot of folks are challenged, is to really get to that deeper surface level, because it really requires a complete shift. And what we want often is a very quick checklist to say, we did it. Like, give me, Edgar, come and meet with us. Give me the 10 things we need to change today. There are lots of things we can change right now, but to get to equity in our organizations, it's work that could take years and years and years. And it's a commitment, and it requires resources, and it requires change management. That's what I'm hoping to see. I think, folks, the other thing that I'll say is that because equity is such a buzzword right now, it's really important to, when you're looking for support with equity, there are plenty of organizations led by people of color that have been doing this work for a long time. And I encourage people to tap into those resources, because equity has become a new line of business. Everyone's putting their shingle out all of a sudden and claiming to be experts about it. And so I I really feel a little discouraged when I hear about corporations or large institutions hiring these firms who are not, this is not really what they do. This is a chance to practice equity and actually invest in those smaller firms, those B Corps, those independent consultants that have been doing this work and have got us this far. I'm glad that it is a buzzword, but we need to go beyond the buzzword. As my friend Voulet says, that he kind of makes a joke that equity means saying the word equity over and over again without changing anything. We don't want that definition of equity.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. All right, we've got time for two more questions, one on action and one on rest. So on action, tell us about Liberated Capital.
Yeah, Liberated Capital is a fund that I launched in late 2018, really responding to a need that I saw. As I traveled all over the place talking about decolonizing wealth, I became a person that a lot of philanthropists wanted support from in terms of donor advising. Like, Edgar, which organization should we fund? Who should we trust? Where we put our money? And so I directed folks to like a lot of places to put money, and I found that it did not get there after the conference or the meeting or whatever. And so I wanted to think of a way to connect people into an opportunity right in real time. And then the more I thought about it, I said, well, what we also need to do is get beyond transactional relationships and get to a place of really having a community to dig into this work around healing. So Liberated Capital is a fund. It's a membership that anyone can go and sign up to be a member. There's no limits on any monthly amount that you can give. And it's inviting you to join a fund that is about reparations and wealth redistribution. We accept money. We accept stock. We're looking at accepting land because there are folks who want to return land back to indigenous ownership. And so we are taking wealth and we are getting it back out to organizations led by Black and Indigenous people. And we are creating a community to have transformative conversations about racial healing through giving. And so for our members who might hear this, we are starting our programming this fall, and we're super excited about having a radical place to just be vulnerable, to share our money stories, and to think about how we use our resources as medicine in this world to heal each other and to heal the planet.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's going to be in the show notes for this episode so people can find it. But I also wanted you to know that we are going to be making a donation in many thanks to you for being on for today and on behalf of Mission Partners. So we're going to be tracking it as an invested member as well.
Wonderful.
And my last question is, you have been at this. It just seems like, clearly for 2 years, but for way more than 2 years, you have been at this. So how do you care for yourself? Where do you find time for rest and for healing for yourself?
I still appreciate that. I need to do better. I talk about healing all the time, but I have connected with an Indigenous healer who I meet with about once a month. And it's a person that I am allowing to hold me accountable to conversations around how I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, what questions I'm holding. It's really like therapy. And so I am in this healing process with this person. That's one way. I also love taking baths. And, with my Lush bath bombs, that's like something that I do just to close off the world and to relax in a hot tub. I also massage therapy is really big for me. I think human touch and doing things to relax and I have quiet time. I live in New York City, so I also kind of joke about massage therapy as like I'm just paying someone to take a nap and to have a quiet spot, for an hour. But these are my practices. I need to do better. I will say that I also just try to laugh as much as possible and to be around friends that crack me up because it's such a heavy time, y'all. And there's so much death and there's so much fear and just terrible things going on in the world. And, I don't want to make light of that. But at the same time, like for me, my joy is my strength. And so I try to find some way to have a deep belly laugh at least once a day.
Well, we are sitting here on a Friday afternoon doing this interview, so I hope you have some good rest in front of you and some good belly laughs in front of you for the weekend ahead. I have so much gratitude, Edgar, for taking some time with me to do this today. I have loved talking with you and learning from you, and just really appreciate what you've been doing and how you've been doing it. So thank you.
Thank you for having me on the program. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to today's show. I love how Edgar is challenging business as usual and putting truth to power with love, as he says. If you like what you heard in today's show, I hope you'll consider sharing this episode with a friend or colleague. And if it's inspired you to learn more, do more, or take action, I hope you'll let me know. Drop me a line over at Carrie@mission.partners and tell me how this content is leaving an impact on you. Until next time, good luck moving your mission forward.